Welcome to the Behind the Bits podcast. Your host, Scott Curtis, wants to learn everything he can about stand-up comedy and take you along for the ride. Scott and his guests talk serious about comedy in every episode. Behind the Bits will uncover knowledge from different perspectives on subjects such as writing and performing stand-up comedy, as well as booking shows and the comedy life. If you're thinking about becoming a stand-up comic, already in the comic game, or a comedy nerd, Behind the Bits is the show for you. Now, let's get Behind the Bits.
Well, hello. Welcome to my second streaming on Twitch. So this is the way it's going to go from now on. The interview is going to be live streamed on Twitch exclusively because people want to see the video interview. And I still want you to download the podcast because that's how I make my money. So I'm going to do the Twitch thing to make it a little bit harder for you to watch, but if you watch on Twitch and I get enough people, then I'll get paid that way too. So it's all about the money for me. No, it's not about the money, but I just like to offset my expenses with a little bit of cash. So the interviews will be, I'll be putting them up on social media where I'm at, when I'm going to do them, because the interviews are not at a set time. So I'm excited to be doing this. I've been checking out different Twitch channels and stuff like that, and it's actually pretty cool. A lot of people are doing podcasts, doing talk shows and stuff like that. So I'm an old dog, but I'm learning a new trick here, so it's fun. The other thing that is happening is the BTB Internet Talk Show is moving to not this channel, not this one, but the Drinks, Jokes, and Storytelling channel. So you go to Drinks, Jokes, the letter N, Storytelling, and follow them. And my BTB Internet Talk Show will be starting next week, which is the 18th, and I'm moving up to 7:30 to 8:30. So that will be a lot of fun. I'm joining a bunch of great comedians, a bunch of great talk show hosts, and that's going to be a thing. And I'm super stoked about it. So if you want to watch it live, Twitch is the only way you can watch it live. I will probably put a re-air. I'll probably put a rerun or something up the following week whenever I feel like it. But yeah, if you want to watch live, and a lot of you do, get over to Twitch. It's Drinks, Jokes, and Storytelling. I forgot to make a graphic for it, but I've been sharing it, so just look for it there. So let's get in with the interview here. I remembered to hit record, so that's a +1. So today I've got Aaron Simmonds, and he is a former BBC New Comedy Award and Amused Moose Comedy Award finalist. And if you don't know it, Amused Moose is the big deal in over in the UK. That's the premier comedy training and comedy show thing. So we'll talk about that. He has a critically acclaimed show called Disabled Coconut, which was nominated for Best Comedy Show in the Broadway World UK Edinburgh Fringe Awards. Boy, that is a lot. Best Comedy Show in the Broadway World UK Edinburgh Fringe Awards. That's a lot of words. But yeah, I've got Aaron Simmonds, and I am stoked. So let's bring him up right now. Aaron, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm going to put you over here. I like you on the left, on my left instead of the right, because then it looks more like I'm looking in the camera.
Cool.
Man, I'm really stoked to have you on the show. I don't remember how I found you. I don't know if you reached out to me or if I reached out to you, but here we are.
Here we are. Who knows how any of this really started? I think you started following me on my podcast channel, and then I listened to your podcast. And I was like, okay, that's cool. I'll give that a go. And I messaged you about it.
And I've had a few UK comics on, and that's it's really nice to get that perspective, because you guys are a little bit different in your sensibilities and the way you emote, the way you go through ideas and stuff like that. So I think it's really neat to see the similarities and the differences. But let's talk about you. Let's talk about obviously you haven't always been a comic, but you have probably liked a few comics because everybody that's ever been a comic has been inspired. So who was it that you saw when you were growing up or before you started comedy that really said, hey, I'd kind of like to do that?
So it's an interesting one because I always wanted to be a comic. And I remember at sort of 14, 15, I would watch comedy in a very different way than everybody else would. So like in the UK, we would get, so you got a couple of different comedy shows that I would watch sort of over and over and over again, which is sort of Live at the Apollo. I don't know if you've ever watched that, but that's quite a big one over here. And we had sort of Comedy Central at the Comedy Store and these kind of things where it's just pure stand-up. It's not anything like that. And I remember I had sort of I had videos of Frank Skinner live and Eddie Izzard live. And I would watch it over and over and over again. And like my mum just couldn't work out why I was watching this show. And I was finding it funny every single time. Whereas in her world, once you hear a joke, you've heard the joke, it's not funny the second time. Whereas I would watch it again and again and again and find it just in the same way that I would watch comedy now. Like, okay, how does that bit work and all that kind of stuff. Now I'm very different to Eddie Izzard. I'm not anywhere near as good, but also just a very different comic than he is. But I think those were sort of the big sort of earliest memories I have of stand-up. And yeah, never sort of thought about doing it until I was 20. When did I start? 24 I started. So probably thought about it sort of 23, 22-ish. But yeah, so I've always wanted to be a comic, and those are the sort of.
I absolutely love Eddie Izzard. He's like I call him the British Joan Rivers, just because I mean they were both very similar, and it was like a machine gun attack with their punchlines and stuff like that, and they also didn't take any shit, and it was really cool watching them. And I'm like you, I watch stuff ad nauseum just so I can see, okay, how did they move their mouth when they said that, and where was their left foot? And it's funny because when I watch specials now, I will watch them with my wife, and I'll watch it just to watch it and enjoy it. And I have to make sure I turn off that part of my brain that's trying to analyze it and just enjoy it. And then when she's gone, then I watch it again so I can take notes.
I think that's an important thing to do. Of like, if you're only in analytical mode and you're constantly on, then you're going to stop enjoying comedy and therefore not going to be as good at it. And like, I think the reason why good comics are good comics is because they love comedy and they stick around for the whole night and they make sure they watch every single act and all that kind of stuff. And I think that makes a big difference to someone becoming good and someone becoming very good. And if you drive yourself insane with not being able to switch off, that love of it is going to eventually burn out. And so I think that sort of sit down and enjoy it first of all, and then you're thinking, okay, how can I learn from this secondarily? I think that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, one comic I interviewed he had a great approach because he says, I don't think about comedy in the morning.
Okay.
And because I don't perform it in the morning, I'm not going to think about it in the morning, and I need to fill my life with other stuff. And there's a certain cutoff, and then I'll start thinking and writing.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I was the same, but I struggle to switch off very bad. What's the swearing / adult content aspect of this? Am I able
you
to
can
swear?
say anything. You can say whatever you want.
Okay, cool. I've thought of jokes during blowjobs, and like I can't, like that part of my brain, I find it really hard to switch off. And I did stop the blowjob and be like, hang on, I need to write this down. This is very funny. You
Yeah.
can carry on afterwards, but I just need to make a note of this.
Isn't it weird to have notes, though? You go back and the only two words on your note is blowjob.
Yeah, no, my notepad is the thing of a serial killer. Like, if I die tragically, and they're going to be like, what is this nonsense? Yeah. Like, no, it's not something that I would be particularly proud to be public record.
Yeah. It's funny. I put a lot on my phone because I've always got my phone with me. I always have pencil and paper, and I'll just be scrolling along. So along with it is my grocery list, measurements for projects I'm doing, just all kinds of stuff. And then all of a sudden, you son of a bitch, stuff like that. I'm like, what? Where did this come from?
Yeah, you don't know if broccoli is what you actually need to buy from the supermarket, or you got a very wry observation about it.
Yeah.
It's a difficult balance.
No doubt. So thinking about that first time that you did stand up, obviously you'd been thinking about it for a while. I mean, if you were thinking about it since you were 15 and it was 24 when you went up, I mean, you got 9 years and it's percolating in there. Yeah. And thinking about that first time, did you go through the training at Amused Moose first, or did you just go up?
No, so I didn't train with Amused Moose. The award was given to me because of my Edinburgh show. And I've done work with Hills before. But I had, when I said like I've been thinking about it, like in the same way that everyone dreams of being a professional footballer, like I would dream about being a professional comic. I didn't think it was ever going to happen. So when I did my first ever gig, I remember I was 24, so it was July 2014. I had an idea of what I wanted to say. So a friend of mine's boyfriend had done stand up, and he said that I should give it a go. And it just sort of kept saying it over and over in my head in the drive to work, and then just got up and did it. It was sort of the best experience I've ever done, most nerve-wracking I've ever been. I remember I brought dinner with me because I just don't skip meals. Like, the people would be like, oh, I forgot lunch. I genuinely don't understand how their brain works. Like, how can you forget lunch? It's one of the highlights of the day. But I remember this time on my first gig, it was the first time I'd missed dinner in 9 years because I was just so nervous. Like I genuinely couldn't eat. So that was the sort of first time I got up on stage was that night. And that sort of went surprisingly well. I think so. You guys listeners won't be able to tell, but I'm in a wheelchair most of the time. I'm not at the moment. I'm just on my couch. But I think the nature of an open mic gig where you've got 20 acts on the bill, just having someone different is enough. And, the fact that I was talking about something that was slightly more interesting than, Tinder or whatever the hack open mic topics were at the time, probably meant that I got a little bit ahead of where I would have been without that.
Right. It does. It obviously just makes you notice. We've got a gentleman here that is he's confined to an electric wheelchair because his legs and arms don't work very well, and he obviously commands the stage right at the beginning, but after that you've only got a few seconds to impress people. I know, when I think of myself, I'm pretty jaded. I mean, you could come up with no arms, no legs, and I still expect funny. So
that is the tricky thing. Like, I think for me, it's a difficult balance because I think a lot of comedians who have that instant likability. It's not necessarily just being in a wheelchair, but there are just some people that just have just a lovely smile, or like just something about them is so warm that audiences just, you know, are just absolutely on their side straight away, that it can be quite a tricky thing to get that balance right of actually making sure that your jokes are funny enough without that sort of helping hand. Because one of the things I found is about I'm going to jump around a lot because that's the way my brain works. That's but cool. Unlike my legs, there you go. One of the things that I found sort of 2-3 years into my comedy career was I got a lot better at making things funny. So I would take an average story and learn how to make it good. Whereas what I was doing before that point was, because I didn't have those skills in order to make a joke funnier or a story funnier, I would have to have a really funny story to start off with. And because I got better at telling the stories and setting it all up and all that kind of stuff, it meant that I then started telling less funny stories in a funnier way. And so I realized, oh, hang on, no, I need to go back to those funny stories and then make them even funnier. And that's how I'm going to grow as a comic. And so I think it's a similar thing is, you know, if you can say, I'm going to make these jokes as funny, or I'm going to make sure that I am as likable as I would be if I wasn't in a wheelchair, or if I didn't smile, or I didn't oversell a bit or whatever, it then means that when you do all of those things on top of writing a good joke, it then is going to escalate it even further. Like I heard a thing that Chris Rock, when he's doing new material, he just says it. He doesn't perform it. And that says a lot, because he's one of the best performers that's ever been. Yeah. And if he can go on stage and just read a sentence and it gets something, he knows that he can perform it well enough in order to make sure it's a good bit.
Right.
So I think that's quite an important thing. And it's something that I've noticed some comedians accept the easy laugh and the simple laugh. And I refuse to do that.
And you've got a perspective to write from. A lot of your humor comes, at least at the beginning, comes from how people perceive you as being confined to a wheelchair. So you've got obviously something original to work from, but the way you do it in the storytelling mode is, I guess it's something that draws you in, and it has teeth to it. And the other thing is, you know, I watched quite a few of your clips, and you seem really comfortable up there. You seem to have no fear at all of public speaking.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a very comfortable wheelchair. I think that's the key. So I do think that is a lot of it. I think just sort of sitting there, and there's a lot of authority, I think, in that. I just sort of sitting there. I'm very calm. I'm just sat down having a chat with you. And yet this is funnier than anything you've ever thought of. I think that is important, and that does make a difference. Yes, I am comfortable on stage now. I mean, it's been 6-7 years. God, I'm getting old. 7 years that I've been doing it. And I think that part of that comfort comes from the scales being in my favor. And I've always thought this about comedy, particularly, but we go on stage and we say the thing we've been working on for 3 months, 6 months, 5 years, depending on what the bit is. And yes, you can say things in the moment, and, you know, we pride ourselves on being able to do that as well. But you've always got that advantage in the fact that the audience member has never thought about this for a second. They don't know how it's supposed to go. So when you dictate how you want it to go, you're in complete control. And the other thing to bear in mind with that scenario is about heckles and all of this kind of things that people sort of build up in their mind you know, you'll know this, like the first thing that people ask you when they find out you're a comic is, yeah, but how do you deal with heckles? And A, they don't happen as often as you think, but B, there's never going to be a situation where you are less experienced in dealing with a heckle than a heckler is in giving that heckle.
Right. Yeah.
So they see you on stage and they go, oh, it's called stand-up comedy, mate. Stand up.
Yeah.
And I've heard that probably 30 times.
Uh-huh.
And they've just thought of it and they think they're the funniest person in the world. And then you just take all the material you have about able-bodied people, and instead of calling all able-bodied people, you ask them what their name is, and when they say it's Jim or Dave or whatever, you just say, yeah, so Dave has this thing about disabled people, and he thinks this, this, and this, and then people think you're a genius, that you've come up with all of these observations about this one guy off a heckle, but you haven't about any able-bodied person. So I think that's where that confidence comes from, is that I know that I'm driving. I've got the microphone in my hand. I've got 100 people listening to what I have to say, and I am in complete control of where that conversation goes to. But B, even if I do let go of the control, I know where it's going. I've driven on that road before, and they haven't. So I think that's why I feel so comfortable in that kind of scenario, because of, it's just I know all the cards are in my favor, because is the other thing about it. Not only do I have all the experience of someone shouting out, but for me personally, when somebody does shout out, the audience is straight on their back. And I can say anything as long as it's quick, they'll all laugh and we can move on. And I think that's a sort of a really safe place to start from. And quite often, I think it's interesting what you said about that you're still looking for people to be funny, whether they have no arms or legs or whatever. And I agree with that. And I think what's interesting, though, is I do think people lower their guard for just a second. And if you can get them in that second where they're like, oh, I'm not sure if this guy's going to be funny, and then you tell a really quick, funny joke and everyone relaxes, then I've got them. So my first joke is often just one word, and it's parkour, because I make a meal out of getting on stage. And by that point, I've got them. And so I know it's going to be a good set from then on. So, yeah, I am pretty comfortable on stage now. And I'm guessing you've only watched the videos that are online, which are, I'm not going to lie, the good ones. If you want me to send you one of me dying on my ass, I've got plenty of those as well.
You keep all those too, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. If I get too cocky, I just bring one of them out and bring you back down to earth.
Do you? I know that in your bio that you're a personal trainer. How do you approach going on stage? Because I've got some guesses. Do you approach it in the fact that it's your job to just slay that audience, and if you do, then you won. You won the game? Or do you feel like it's a push and pull between the audience? You feel like you owe something to the audience and you need to earn that respect?
I mean, I don't think of it as a competition. It's not me versus the audience, because I don't think anybody goes to a comedy night not wanting to have a good time. I think that's a fundamental thing to remember. It's like these people have paid £10, £20, £30 if they're coming to see a tour show. It is your job to make sure they have a good night. There are certain times where that is against you, or that's certain times where it just doesn't go your way. And that happens. But no, essentially, I think that it's not a confrontation. And so if you go, look, I'm going to tell you some jokes. If you listen, I know they're funny. If you laugh, I'll keep telling funny stuff. And we'll go from there. And the 20 minutes will be a lot more fun than if you're shouting and facing the wrong way and all this kind of stuff. So I think it's more of a sort of an unwritten agreement between the audience and the comic to both try and make each other have as good time as possible. And I think that's been exaggerated now, the fact that we're doing so much stuff over Zoom and you know, you look at something like sporting events where they don't have a crowd in, it's making a real difference. And like, I think that's sort of highlighting how important those kind of things are to the people who are, you know, trying to do their job, whether it's football, whether it's comedy, whatever.
Right.
You know, I think it does make a real difference. And I think that if you have people who are, again, trying to be antagonistic, then again, you can play off that. But I think most of the time, if you go with the premise of like, okay, let's tell some jokes. If they like it, they'll laugh. And you go from there. And I think that's kind of the attitude that I have towards that.
Let's talk about writing. You said that you're always thinking about comedy and writing stuff down. On an average week, let's talk an average week. How many jokes do you think that you churn out? Not just the ones that you're going to use, but the ones that you're going to throw away too. So
in the last however long we've been in a pandemic, about 6. So I very much sort of when lockdown. So in the UK, we're locked down at the minute, so we're not allowed out of our houses or anything like that. When that first happened, I just couldn't write anything. I was just like, no, I'm not going to be saying any of this stuff, so I'm not going to be writing any of this stuff. But I would say it's a difficult one because I tend not to write jokes or like standalone jokes. So what I will probably be more focused on when I am writing is getting a bit that is, you know, a story or an observation or a routine. I mean, like, okay, let's see if I can squeeze, like, wring the flannel out a little bit more, get one more joke into there, one more. Oh, can I add this into there? Can that bit go? Can I get a callback in there? Those kind of things. I would say I try to do that sort of once every couple of days. Like, I don't actively force myself to sit down and write. If I sit down and write at a laptop, it's going to be dog shit. Like, that is just not the way my brain works. But I think that I personally believe the best way of writing is to write, record, listen, edit, and repeat. And so you go on stage with a couple of ideas, is try them out, see how they work. Oh, there's you hear the sirens? I was in the 90s. So you go on stage with an idea. Like, I try not to like fully write the idea down now. Like before, when I first started, it was very much learn what you're going to say. And I think that was part of, I wasn't getting the amount of stage time that I would have liked. I was only able to do it sort of once, twice a week because of my job. Now that I don't have a job, you know, and I was doing it sort of 5, 6, 7 times a week, and for much longer, I could go on a little bit more free, a little bit more trust myself in order to make those jokes and make them work. And so you say them with a rough idea of what you want to do. I tend to have the final punchline sorted so that I know I can play around with the bit in the end, and I've still got that in the back pocket. And then once you come off stage, record everything you do. Always record. Like, there's absolutely no reason not to record a gig. Like, it doesn't have to be video. It can be audio if you know what your face does during a gig. But like I know what my face does. It's been said in several different reviews that I've got good eyebrows. I don't know what that means, but I've got good eyebrows. You are welcome to watch my eyebrows. But like, I know what my face does, so I will record it orderly and just put it in the pocket. And like, it doesn't have to be great. It doesn't have the only reason to listen to it is so that you have that objectivity when you come back to listen to it, because you can gig and you can think you smashed it, and you can get gig and you think you die on your ass. And I guarantee you, when you come back to listen to it later, it is going to be bang in the middle. But it may be, instead of say smashing it as 100 and dying on your ass as 0, it may not be 50-50 for both of those gigs. It may be 70-30 or 60-40 or whatever, but it won't be as bad as you think it is, or won't be as good as you think it is.
Right.
Because when you're performing, you don't want to be trying to think, oh, how can I make that joke slightly better? You want to be there in the performance and make the most of it. So if you can relax and say, look, I've got that audio, no matter what I say in the moment, I'm going to remember it because it's going to be there until I listen to it next week. Then you can make the decision of what you're going to do next. And so you try stuff out, see if it works, come back, listen to it, and be ruthless. Like, I think a lot of the time, I remember when I first started, I heard the phrase, never gets a laugh, but I like that joke. And I was like, what are you doing? The audience is telling you it's not a good joke. And like, maybe it's because I'm dead inside and that I just don't have, you know, people think of their joke as babies. I don't like the idea of babies. So, you know, like, if something doesn't, if the audience is telling you time after time after time, this isn't funny, change it. And it doesn't mean that you have to get rid of it and never use it ever again, because it could be one of those things that it just doesn't work in that routine or in that show or at that time in the world. Like, there are routines that I have that don't work during COVID, and there are times and there are stuff that's going to be COVID related that won't work in 6 months' time, hopefully. But I think that if you can be, if you can be a good editor, your writing will look after itself.
Yeah. I totally agree with the recording, because you are definitely not in an objective place when you're on the stage, because I have totally misread jokes and actually my entire act and thought either exactly what you said. I either thought I killed when I didn't, or I thought that I totally sucked and it turned out it wasn't that bad. But it's all, you know, you're trying to be in the moment and you're trying to be as good as you can. And then if you get the self-doubt and stuff like that going, then it just totally messes you up. And the other thing is those jokes you talk about that people won't let go of. That's a totally an ego thing. And I had a couple in the beginning that I thought, I'm going to keep saying these until somebody laughs. And then I finally had to say, okay, it's time to bury you. You're done.
What was the longest joke that you left in that never got a laugh?
It was a joke about my my wife and I going, it was no, that's not the one. The longest one, because it was a longer story and I had tags, was a grocery store joke about how I don't like the way people just hang out at the grocery store. My job is to get in and get out as fast as I can. And I talked about cashiers and stuff like that. Now it's something that I may bring back, because now that I'm a little bit more seasoned, I think I can do stuff with it. But it was just awful, because it was too long to the punch. The tags were too far apart. It wasn't good.
No, I've had plenty of those, but again, kill your babies.
Now, thinking about your style of humor, there's, I really, there's a lot of styles, but the two main ones that I think of are storytelling along with observation, and there's the rapid fire one-liners. And the difficulty for somebody who does rapid fire one-liners is they got to write a lot of stuff to fill the time. And the difficulty you have with storytelling is that you have to have enough tags during the story that people laugh, but you got to have the big one. You got to come to ahead at the joke that, you know, it really pays off. And that's really difficult, because I do a similar style as you in that, and it's really difficult to make sure you're keeping the attention and also getting the big payoff at the end.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think I always found that was how I was funniest naturally in real life before I did stand up is telling a story. And I always sort of had a sense of where that big laugh goes at the end. My big thing about being a storyteller is you're right. Like there is a lot of pressure in order to get that big laugh and to almost justify why you've talked about a subject for 5 minutes to have this big payoff. But that's the reason why I want to be a storyteller. Like you can just get a bigger laugh than you could by just doing one joke after another. You can build to this big conclusion. And that is how I've always found it easier to write. What I found about being a storyteller is that when I was doing 5 minute spots around with other people who do 5 minute spots, I was a very similar level to them. And then the longer that the sets became, the more I stood out because I could tell more stories, but also it didn't feel like it was a massive jump for me to go from 5 minutes to 10 minutes because I was like, all right, well, I'll tell another story. Whereas if you're doing 5 minutes of one-liners, that's, you know, twice as much work in order to be able to fill that time. And then more so to make sure that those one-liners are a different kind of one-liner to the one before. Whereas with stories, I didn't find like it was that tricky because there's always something else to talk about. And I've done a lot of stupid things in my life, which makes it very easy to talk about. I always liked the fact that it meant that you could sort of, it is tricky, like you say, of keeping their attention. And like on a Friday and Saturday night where people are getting absolutely hammered, you know, do you have enough short jokes within a story in order to be able to tell them? It is tricky. Again, I think one of those things of coming from a different perspective and showing them something that they haven't seen before in terms of going, hey, have you ever had sex in a disabled toilet? What? No, hey, hang on. I want to hear more. Can we hear more of it? So I think there are ways around that. But I do think it does make a big difference. Having that, just having an angle and having a reason to talk about it. I think that's because that's very different between the UK and the US. Like, so my main sort of writing year is revolved around Edinburgh shows. So I try and write an hour's new show every year, and it's based on a story of my life. So my last one was about what happened to me between 2017 and 2018, and then what happened between actually a couple of years before that. I got given a nickname about being in a wheelchair, and I wanted to write a show all about it. The nickname was Hot Wheels, which I'll be honest, I'm delighted with. It's a great nickname. So yeah, I think just having that reason to talk about something makes a huge difference. Of like, I think you need both of those things, of a reason to talk about it being an interesting subject and something that's going to be engaging to people, and that big punchline, and having those tags along the way. Yes, that's a lot of things to put into position, but if you get those things into position, you're golden. So that's where I sit in terms of the storytelling. Is like, in a way it's hard work, but if you put that hard work in, you get bigger results. Right.
Thinking about your style and the way audiences react and bobbing and weaving that you can do, when you're in a narrative like yours, do you have any room at all to like move around bits and stories? Like if you're losing an audience, do you have, can you bring that one that's the second to last joke into the middle just to bring them back? Do you do that, or do you just pretty much stay with the outline?
I don't have any sort of get out of jail cards. I don't have any sort of real bailouts for stories. I do think I back myself like 9 times out of 10, like carrying on with the original story is going to be better than trying to bail out of it or try and run away from it.
Mm.
I also just trust myself as a comic now that if it's not going well, that I'll be able to deal with it, and that I can invite interaction. And like, I've done enough MCing that like, I know that I can do that well, and I have that skill that if that, you know, if for example, I was doing a gig and then started mumbling, and I'd be like, fuck this story. I want to know what you're gossiping about. I used to work in the gym. I have no gossip. Please tell me all the gossip. And then, you know, you start talking about one of their sex lives, and then you go from there. And then I think one of the things that MCing taught me is if you can go from what they're talking about into another story, so it feels like you've just thought of it, it makes a huge difference. And if you can get those people that are not quite, there we go, they're not quite as engaged as they were, then it makes a big difference in terms of like, I think there are sometimes where you can just pick up those key people and be like, oh, you're not interested in that story. Okay, that's fine. What would you like me to talk about then? That can make a difference. But at the same time, if there's 100 people in the audience and 2 of them aren't listening, fuck them. Like, I'm more interested in the 98% of people who are listening and enjoying what I'm saying than, you know, the 2 dickheads in the front row going, I think his glasses are from Vision Express, but I think they're from Specsavers. What do you think? But yeah, so I think it's a difficult balance.
Yeah. So when you started getting the critical acclaim that you got, how did that affect you? I mean, it's honestly coming fairly early in your career, because a lot of folks don't get there until, you know, 10 years.
Yeah. I'm an even bigger egomaniac than I was before. So that's one of the things. No, so I think it has come quickly, and I recognize that. I'm very lucky to be in the position that I am. Like, some key things happened at the right time for me. And like, if so, that BBC thing that you were talking about, it literally came when I had 5 minutes of material, and like my 5 minutes was significantly better than my 10 minutes. And then I got that, and I was like, oh, okay, now I need to write a decent 10 minutes. And all of these things just sort of clicked into place for me, which is really, really nice. And I definitely don't take that for granted. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, I don't tend to stop and think too much, which I think is not a particularly healthy way of getting on with your life. But I think that even though I have achieved a lot of success in the you know, the 7 years that I've been going, it's not where I set myself. That's not the finish line to me. And I think a lot of my previous experiences has been about starting something really well, having a lot of potential in something, and then stopping for a variety of different reasons. And I don't want to do that with comedy. And so, you know, yes, it's lovely that nice people have said nice things about me, and I'm not taking that for granted, but it's not the finish line. Like, I don't in 10 years time, I don't want to be telling people about how I was BBC New Comedian of the Year finalist in 2017. Like, I want to keep improving and keep having other things to talk about. And like, keep having different police cars come past my flat every 5 to 10 minutes, and maybe get a bigger flat where there are more police cars. Maybe an ambulance or 2, you know, dream the dream, maybe a fire truck one day. But yeah, no, I mean, it's nice. I mean, I think it would be sort of churlish to be like, oh yeah, no, nothing good's ever happened to me. Like, I appreciate everything that's happened to me, but I also think it happens because I work hard. Like, there's that phrase, the harder I work, the luckier I get. I've always ascribed to that. But one thing I heard very early on in my comedy career was a quote. I think it's from James Corden. He says, everybody gets lucky, but you have to be ready for when the luck comes. And that was a huge thing for me, because at that time, it did seem like this world was sort of impenetrable, and like when you're an open spot, like how you get to get a 10-minute spot on a pro bill seems impossible, because there's thousands and thousands of people that could do that 10 spot as well, if not better than you. So it's about how do you get to that next level. And so I remember thinking when I heard that, okay, so a lot of it isn't in my control, but the things that are in my control are getting better and working harder. And so when that BBC thing came along, I'd got a 5-minute set that was good enough to be in that show and good enough to get me to the final. Now, I could have quite easily not. I think it was very lucky that I got picked that first out of the 600 people that applied. But I was good enough when I did. And from that point, it then meant that I got a nice video out of it, which meant that I could send that to promoters, which meant that I got more open spots. And then I carried on writing, and writing got 20. And then I because I did that BBC thing, the BBC asked me to do another show for them the following year in Edinburgh. And my agent came to see that show because one of his clients was already was also performing in that show. Again, that's lucky, but that didn't mean my agent signed me, because he saw me do 5 minutes that he'd seen me do before.
Right.
He then went to see the show that I'd written, that I'd worked really hard on, that I had a 45-minute show that was good. And it meant that he then came to see that, and then he signed me. So it's this kind of stuff of being like, when you get the luck is completely random and not in your control, but what you do with it completely is. And so I think that's important. And that is what drives my work ethic, to make sure that there's going to be lucky things along the way, but I'm going to make the most of them, because that's the reason why I've been successful up until this point, and that's why I'm going to continue to be successful, hopefully.
Yeah. One of the common threads with comedians that I've talked to that do well fairly early is that they have been, you talk about the luck, they've been thrown into something that they thought they weren't ready for, but it turns out they had been working hard enough that they were ready for it, and they excelled at it, and that actually propelled them. Yeah.
I mean, I have got that in certain areas, and there are also certain areas where you jump the gun and you're not ready, and it's held you back. Like, I remember I did my first open 10 spot, a pro gig, way too early. I think I was about 6 months in, and I'd written 10 minutes that was getting okay laughs at a open mic night. And then I went to a pro gig, and you have professional comedians doing an absolute bulletproof 20, and I'm there going, with the hack material, and it just didn't work. And like I think I got away with it to a certain degree, but the promoter just doesn't, like, even now doesn't book me. And that's because they have this attitude, oh, he's an open micer. Whereas, you wait a little bit longer, or not even necessarily wait. If you just deal with that situation slightly better, then you have a different outcome. But yeah, no, totally. I think there were a lot of things that I probably wasn't as ready as I would have liked to have been before doing them. And then I've just sort of been able to do well with them and go from there. I think those kind of experiences happen the more comfortable and confident that you are in your ability. So the longer you do it, or the harder you work, like, you're right, is like, I can stand on a stage with nothing prepared and I'd be quite comfortable, and I can talk, and I'm fairly sure that I could make something funny, and I could make people laugh for 20 minutes quite comfortably. Whereas when I first started, I couldn't do that. And even just the idea of 5 minutes would make me uncomfortable. And so I think the more comfortable you can get in your own skin and understanding what you do that makes people laugh is going to make you a better comic in any situation. And FYI, it is going to make you get laid more often. So.
Yeah. Oh man, that's funny. I've been with the same woman for 37 years, so that's not what I'm going for.
That's the rookie error. Like, you need to get the comedy when you're young and single.
Oh man, yeah, okay, that's good. So you did mention at the top that you have bombed, and bombing is part of what comedy is. How do you regroup after a bomb? What do you do?
Get on stage as quickly as possible.
Okay.
So that was one of the reasons why I was really scared of doing an online gig during the first lockdown, is because my way of dealing with a bomb is to just get on stage as soon as I can, do either jokes that I know work, or do some new stuff, or just play around, have some fun, no pressure. And I was worried that if I did a gig to silence, essentially because the audience weren't mic'd, or, the tech wasn't there at the beginning of lockdown because no one knew how to run an online gig.
Yeah.
It would feel like I was bombing, and my solution to feel like you're bombing, get on stage again, wouldn't be possible for, a year. And I would feel like I was like die. And like, I remember my last gig before lockdown was a really good gig. And I was like, no, I've got that in the bank. Let's stick with that. Let's not risk it just for an online gig. But yeah, I think that's my only sort of real technique to deal with bombing is, I think there are lessons you can learn from bombing, and, mistakes you have made that you don't want to repeat. But I think you can also learn lessons that are not necessarily true. So like, I remember the worst I've ever bombed was in this like village hall kind of thing. I don't know if you have a sort of a similar setup, but like, it was basically just like a bar, really dingy bar, but like, it was this really small town, but everyone went from the town, and it was their like local hub, and it was a really long, thin room. And I was like, okay, this is either a ride or die situation. Like, you can't have an okay, good gig in this place. And I was down in the middle, and the opening act did well, and I was like, okay, this is going to be a good gig. It's fine. And during the interval, I realized that I wouldn't be able to go from the back of the room in between all the people because there was no room for my chair. So I had to carry my chair over all of the audience during the interval and sit by the stage. And I was just sat there. And then there was these two girls on this table. And one of them said to me, do you get nervous? And I turned to her and I went, nah, not anymore. I'm really good. And at that point, I knew I was going to die. Like, I was like, are you fucking more? Why would you say, like, I know why you've said that. They're good looking girls and you want to impress them. But say that after you've done well, or even better, be modest after you've done well. And then you get the best of both worlds. But so I got on stage. I died on my, like, it was so horrific. It was silence for 20 minutes. Whatever I tried, nothing. And it was at the point in my career where I was still applying to all the gigs that I was doing. Like, no one was asking me to do anything. But this was like the first gig that I'd been asked specifically for. And I was dead chuffed about it. And so after I died on my hole for 20 minutes, the MC came back on stage and was like, and the owner of this place wants to have a quick word, Aaron. Could you just stay here? And I was like, no, I want to get off the stage as quickly as humanly possible. He's like, no, just stay here. And it turns out that they invited me to perform because they had just made a disabled toilet and they wanted me to open the disabled toilet for them. So after
you're christening a toilet.
Yeah. So I had to open the toilet. And like with big giant scissors and like, okay, so we're just going to film this. So could you be happy? I was like, be happy. I've just died on my ass for 20 minutes. And like, I declared this toilet open and I just fucked off into the toilet.
Oh man.
And I waited until those girls left before I came out.
Yeah.
No, it was horrible, horrible death. But the reason why I bring that up, right, because A, it's a very funny story, but B, so there are lessons that you can learn there. So baby, don't say that you're very good at comedy before you've done the gig. That is asking for a death. But the things that you can learn that are not true because of that gig is that the material that I did is not good. I might have done one or two things at the beginning of that gig that turns the whole audience off me, and then nothing that I can say will change that. And so you can be like, oh, my usual closer isn't good anymore because of that one gig. It's not the case. With a neutral audience, not even with a good audience, with a neutral audience, that works. Stick with that. Figure out the things you did before the gig, during the beginning of the gig that made you die, and don't worry about the things that happened because you were already dying. Because once you're dying, you start, stumbling and forgetting words, and you never do that when you're doing well. No comic has ever forgotten a word. When a routine is flying, that's not the way our brains work. When it's easy, it's easy. So don't stress too much about what you did when it wasn't working, because that's hopefully a rare occurrence. And if it's not, maybe you shouldn't be doing comedy.
Yeah, right. No doubt. So this is something I like to ask everybody, because comedy is always a community. Sometimes it's not the nicest community in the world, but it's always a community. What is the best and worst advice you've gotten in the 7 years you've been doing stand-up or sit down?
Yeah, there we go. First joke I ever wrote. Best advice. I mean, that be ready for when the luck comes is sort of genuinely the thing that makes the biggest difference. I think a lot of the worst advice tends to come from people who are offering joke advice after a show. I'd be like, so you do a show and be like, oh, you thought about doing this one thing? What? So I mentioned my disabled coconut show. It was about the time I got trolled on the internet for not being disabled enough, and I talk a lot about my disability and his disability and how they interact and all that kind of stuff. And people will come up to me after the show and be like, oh, did you think about this? And I'm like, yes, of course I thought about that. It was the first thing that I thought of. But the problem with that is you've thought about it, and if you've thought about it, everybody else in the audience has thought about it, and therefore I can't use it. And so one of the things I remember hearing about that is, when you're thinking about doing a joke on Twitter or something topical, don't do the first thing that comes to your mind, because everyone thinks of that. Don't do the second thing that comes to your mind, because the smart asses think of that. Do the third thing that comes to your mind, because that's what comedians do. But comedians have to be able to get to that third thing as quickly as muggles can get to that first thing. And that's the real skill. I don't have much time for audience suggested material, particularly able-bodied people suggesting the jokes I could do about being in a wheelchair. Stay in your lane and your own toilets.
I can't tell you how many friends and family members have given me advice and jokes that have seen me perform, and they don't fit with me at all. And I'm like, did you watch? Because I can't go from talking about my kids for 5 minutes to all of a sudden like an eating ass joke. I can't. It just doesn't work. So
it's a hard segue, that, isn't it? To get from one to the other. I'll tell you what is probably my least favorite sentence that I've heard most often since starting comedy is, oh, you can use that one. Like that riles me. No, like anytime you're in any kind of situation, like I think it happens more at family get-togethers than like social get-togethers, but like anytime there's anything funny, someone go, oh, you could use that, and like no, just because 6 people who all know who my Aunt Shirley is doesn't mean that an audience of people who don't know who she is going to find it even remotely funny.
Right.
And like that, oh my God, it makes me so angry.
I did want to talk about the podcast a little bit, because if you're a comedian and you don't have a podcast these days, it seems like something's wrong with you.
Exactly.
So tell me about the podcast.
So it is all about superheroes. It's essentially comedians talking nonsense about superheroes for about half an hour. And so what happened is lockdown 1 came about, and I wanted to pretend it wasn't happening. So I watched all the Marvel movies, and I thought, what would be like, wouldn't it be great to be Iron Man or Hulk or Thor or whatever? And then I thought it'd be even better if you could be a combination of all of these people. And so you could have like the head of Tony Stark and the upper body of Hulk and, you know, the legs of Captain America. And so I was trying to work out what my ultimate hero would be. And I think I came up with 27 different attributes into a hero, including different right hand to left hand, different right wrist and left wrist. It was a good 3 or 4 days that I spent on this. And then so I was having a chat with with a couple of comics that I'm friends with, and they asked me what I've been up to, and I was like, I've come up with this ultimate superhero. What do you think? And then they absolutely tore it apart, and they were like, no, you can't have this. You got to have that. You got to have that. And it was the most fun I'd had in sort of 5-6 months. And I thought, fuck it, this is a podcast idea. And so that's what it is essentially. I get 2 guests who try and come up with their ultimate superhero by combining different body parts of superheroes, and we chat about which one we would prefer and sort of what would they do if they had that in real life, and lots of really hypothetical, silly questions. It's just it's a lot of silly fun.
Sounds like fun. And it's called Silliest Superhero?
Close. I've made it needlessly complicated, this title. It's called The Silliest, Superest, Heroist Podcast.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah. It sounded funny when I said it the first time, and I have to say it every time I introduce the podcast. And it's getting harder and harder. Like, you'd think I'd be quite good at saying it now. I say it, I text you sort of 3 or 4 takes every single time I do a podcast. But I like the thing about it is, like, I'm okay with me having to do 3 or 4 takes. But now that I'm promoting it, like, I've been on radio shows, and they're like, they have to sort of work up to it. They have to have a run up at it. They're like, okay, silliest superhero. Okay, let's do it. And then they go, and it's. I feel like I'm creating a lot of work for other podcasters, so I feel bad about it. Nothing I can do about it now. It's up on iTunes.
I can't wait to do the read and try to read that. So that's a tongue twister. So we'll see how that works for me. So where can people find you if they want to catch you on social media?
It's right in there because I filled it through. So it's at Rolling Comedian, rolling like rolling down a hill, not as in J.K. Rowling. My views on trans people are positive. Big fan of those guys or girls. Or in between, because you know, gender is fluid. At Rolling Comedian is what I meant to say. And yeah, so if you want to check out the podcast, it's on all the usual places. And you can also go to my website, aaronsimmonscomedy.com.
All right. Do you have any plans when things open up to come to the States and give it a shot?
I would love to. There were plans in place before the global pandemic happened. So I am planning on doing it at some point. Whether or not those plans can go ahead as soon as they would have before, I don't know. But yeah, no, I mean, I don't know any comic that wouldn't want to go tour the States for at least a little bit. But yeah, no, if if you guys can find me big enough venues with enough people who wants to listen to this guy talk for an hour and a half, I will be there.
I think you'd go over well, and heck, you could come now, but you're almost guaranteed to get COVID, and then who knows if the hospital has room for you, because we just don't give a shit. It's it's a good way. I have performed in America before. I've done a couple of gigs in New York. I went there 4 or 5 years ago now. They were really fun. Like, I think here I'm just disabled. Over there I'm disabled and English. Oh, what a winning combo that is. You're the whole package.
Yeah, whole package. Think about how many blocks I took. It's I had a good time in the US. I'd love to come back.
Great. Well, it's been great having you on the show. I'm glad we connected, and I'm glad I learned some stuff from you.
I learned stuff from you as well. Mainly,
really?
Never get married. But there's some comedy things in there as well.
All right. Well, thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it, Aaron.
No problem. Anytime, mate.
All right. That was good.
Thanks, man.